All right. Well, welcome back, everybody, to the Rice Report, our conversation series. This is one I'm really excited about because it's a topic that I've had plenty of notifications from YouTube and been ostracized throughout the internet for questioning the climate change agenda. We have probably the world's leading authority on what's really happening there today with Marc Morano. And Marc, I just welcome you onto the show. Thank you so much for being here today.
Thank you, Eric. Happy to be here today. Appreciate it.
Absolutely. Well, let's hop right into it.
Let's get banned. Sorry, I didn't mean to
Let's
say
get banned. Let's do it, man. Let's go. So, I've explained this for many, many years to people. One analogy I give when you hear that ice caps are melting and all these other things, and we're going to lose our coastlines. The analogy I give is put ice cubes in a glass of water. When they melt, does your water overflow from the glass?
Yes.
It's a very simple thing. The climate change agenda is about a $60 trillion extortion plan over a 25-year period headed by the UN and the World Economic Forum, two organizations you should never trust. And Marc has been at the forefront of this with websites, television appearances, ridicule from the public. So I love having folks on here who've been telling the truth and been beating up for a long time. But Marc, give us a quick rundown of the climate change agenda, your view on it, and some of the science.
All right. Well, I've written 3 books. Two books particularly on climate change. One was the Politically Incorrect Guide to Climate Change, and one was Green Fraud, Why the Green New Deal is Worse. And then my most recent book is Great Reset, which shows how they were going to essentially merge the climate and public health into one issue, COVID, climate merging together, which is what they've been trying to do. Now, luckily, the United States currently is out of the World Health Organization. But this whole pandemic treaty is modeled exactly after the climate, and the World Health Organization now declares climate change an existential threat to health. And we have doctors and hospitals and medical societies and medical journals all coming up with climate change. You have doctors diagnosing patients with climate change as an actual rating. What are you suffering from? Climate change. And this is a whole group of doctors beginning in Canada. This is all mainstream media. They want to add climate change as a cause of death. They want climate change death tolls. They want to name summer heat waves. Anyway, make a long story short, the climate has always been going back to pagan history and in primitive societies, although you're not allowed to say primitive because that's considered Western racism.
That's offensive.
Yes, but I'm talking about Aztecs and Mayans. Everyone's always feared the weather / climate, and you had sacrifices to the gods to change the weather. And what's really changed about modern society is that we actually think we're more intelligent than them. So we have now, beginning actually when Abraham Lincoln was president, we were warned by an environmentalist named George Perkins Marsh. 1864, Abraham Lincoln is in the White House, warned that of climatic excess unless mankind changed his ways. And they took this idea that CO2 can potentially warm the atmosphere from a Swedish physicist to turn it into CO2 is the control knob of the climate and we're going to destroy the earth. But if you go back in time in the 1920s, there was all these articles worried about global warming. In the 1930s and 40s, that the Arctic was melting. There was all kinds of articles about that. By the 50s and 60s, we were in a very cold period. There were articles that began about the coming ice age and man-made global cooling. By the 70s, they reached their crescendo. You had the CIA. You had scientists writing President Nixon warning of man-made global cooling. You had Walter Cronkite on CBS, Harry Reasoner on ABC warning of the coming ice age. You had scientific conferences declaring it. You had major publications, scientists at NASA. You had Newsweek and Time, all the same rhetoric. We only had a limited time to act. We must act now. It's causing the extreme weather is causing more instability. We have to geoengineer the climate. We have to add soot to the Arctic. We have to, unbelievable stuff. So 1988 is when it all sort of officially reversed. Not Al Gore, but James Hansen, a scientist, did a hearing saying it was the hottest year and that our CO2 was driving, dangerous climate change. The United Nations formed their panel, and it was off to the races. Al Gore releases Earth in the Balance and his first book, 1992. Anyway,
horrible book.
Yeah, we got really roped into this legally and miserably by a Republican president, George H.W. Bush. The whole Bush family has been an abomination to the president.
Agreed.
Anyway, George H.W. Bush, in the waning days of the 1992 presidential campaign, went down to the Rio Earth Summit. I believe it was August or September of 1992. And he wanted to appear green in his battle against Bill Clinton and also Ross Perot. Ross Perot ended up getting 19% of the vote. I was advising everyone I knew, vote for Ross Perot. And what happened was he signed this Rio Earth Treaty, which ushered in the sustainable development by the United Nations and the entire United Nations climate policy. So that got us into this mess, the United States. Once that happened, and you had funding mechanisms, politics, everything became about this campaign cause of climate change. And what was it really about? Well, the UN is very open and in many ways in terms of their leaders and what they say. They were very clear. This climate agenda has nothing to do with environmental policy, has nothing to do with saving the earth. This is about basically our political goals that we're applying using climate change to achieve. Goals like redistributing wealth, goals like punishing the wealthy nations and transferring money, goals like setting up a global warming slush fund that the UN would administer with hundreds of billions of dollars annually. This was a complete scam from beginning to end. They came up with ridiculous proposals like net zero and carbon taxes and all of these things and they were sold everyone, not only with the United Nations selling them, but President Obama when he was doing it, President Clinton, Joe Biden, his administration, all of them sold it as we need this cap and trade plan because the hurricanes are getting worse. Oh, so a pork barrel spending bill by Congress like Obama's Greens is going to change hurricanes? Are we going to get less tornadoes in Tornado Alley if we tax ourselves? It was just complete medieval witchcraft horseshit. Anyway, long story short, a lot of Republicans got involved. George W. Bush got involved. Mitt Romney was all for it. John McCain was all for it. Every Republican nominee except Donald Trump stopped it. I mean, Reagan didn't really deal with it. It wasn't an issue, but I can't imagine Reagan.
He passed the buck. Reagan passed the buck.
Well, it wasn't really a big issue back then. In the 80s, we were still coming out of the 70s global cooling, and it didn't come an issue until 1988, Reagan's last year in office. So I don't include Reagan, but I'm saying Donald Trump was the only presidential nominee of either party to call it a hoax. And he did that early on when he said it was invented by China to make China basically the global dominant country. That tweet, I think it was 2011, dead on accurate. That may not have been why global warming was invented, but that was certainly the effect of all of the solutions to it. Anyway,
the number one polluter in the world is the biggest advocate. That's the funny part about all of China.
It's hilarious. Yeah, I mean, and not only that, but every policy they push, solar, wind, EVs. Gee, who has a monopoly on every one? Oh my gosh, it's China. Who can produce it cheap? Oh my gosh, China has Uyghur concentration camps. They can do it dirt cheap. They use underage kids in African mines in the Congo. China also has no environmental standards where you have to dig up 500,000 pounds of material, including rare earths, to make 1,000-pound Tesla battery. It was a Chinese empowerment bill from the beginning. You thought NAFTA or free trade or most favored nation and all of those trade deals were bad for America. Well, the climate agenda were those on steroids because it continued to shut down American industry. In fact, we have a direct proof of this. In the late 1970s, Edward Nixon went to the rare earth mining. Up until almost 2000, the United States produced 90% of our own rare earth mining for everything from national defense and all of the electronic components. Flip that around. In the last 35 years, we now import 90% of our rare earths almost exclusively from China. How did that happen? Edward Nixon. Who the hell is Edward Nixon? Richard Nixon's brother. Remember, Nixon did opened his normalized relations with China. You needed a Cold War guy like Nixon to do that. Well, think about it. His family was all involved. They met a lot of Chinese business contacts, Chinese officials, Communist Party. So a few years after that, we have the Environmental Protection Agency started under Nixon. They start coming after U.S. rare earth mining, and they start regulating and taxing them. And we can't handle this. This is going to hurt our business model. Instead of fighting the ridiculous regulations that none of the rest of the world had to do and keeping our dominance of global rare earths, Edward Nixon went to the biggest rare earth mining in America and said, hey, in order to avoid these environmental restrictions coming out of my brother's administration and Jimmy Carter's administration, and even the Reagan administration didn't reverse it, why don't we just send all our rare earths to China? They can process it there. In fact, we can even make deals. They'll start doing rare earth mining. So the American companies went for it to avoid U.S. environmental regulations, and the rest is history. And this was spearheaded by the president's brother, based on normalizing relations, he was like I guess you could call him the Hunter Biden of the 70s, because he was Richard Nixon's brother cashing in, and he was the intermediary between China and the U.S. trying to. Anyway, long story
He
short,
had a lot to do in Iran too at the same time.
yes, he did. Yeah, Nixon. Of course, he had Henry Kissinger with him, and of course, he got us off the officially what was left of the gold standard. And I mean, so there was a lot wrong.
Mission accomplished.
Yes, a lot wrong with Nixon's administration. But anyway, that's another story for another day. Back to climate change. I just throw all that out because this was it goes back to that Trump tweet about China. This really was an agenda. So the question is, well, we really need to do this. Since that 1992 Rio Earth Summit, which spawned the entire UN summit, you can look at CO2. Nothing the United Nations has done, and they've done a lot. They've done all these treaties. They've done all these agreements and net zero goals. They've had countries sign on. They've had all the the mandates have emanated from them. The everything from bans on meat to short haul flights to gas appliance bans to carbon taxes to restrictions on coal and oil and gas and all the subsidies. Everything I'm mentioning drives from the climate agenda. What has it accomplished? CO2 has continued to go up for every single year with no end in sight. In other words, they haven't accomplished anything scientifically related to carbon dioxide emissions or any other so-called greenhouse gas. And all they've done is try to re-engineer society, regulate, tax us, and given the rise of China and the developing world over the once great Western nations. It's so bad now that, with electric car mandates, which are still going on in places like Europe, China is going to be the sole global auto manufacturer. No one can compete with them on EVs. It's done. If you get rid of gas-powered cars, it's over. I mean, we're just going to be all like this to China. So sorry, that's a long answer, but let me
great answer.
One last thing scientifically. Everything the United Nations has said is bullshit. There are hundreds of factors. This is the truth. Hundreds of factors influence the climate. Everything from tilt of the Earth's axis, water vapor, methane, cloud cover, volcanoes, the sun. The idea that carbon dioxide is a control knob has been called scientific nonsense by prominent, European scientists, former UN scientists, Nobel Prize winning scientists. The most recent was John Clauser of the won the physics just in 2023, I believe it was. And he went to the White House and even met with Joe Biden and told Biden he was all wrong on climate science. And Biden's answer to the most recent Nobel Prize winner in physics, an American, was, you're practicing right-wing science, sir. So apparently the Nobel Committee gives out physics awards for, scientific awards for right-wing science. Anyway, hurricanes, floods, tornadoes, wildfires, drought, literally no increase over climate timescales, 30, 50, 100 years. Levels of CO2, even the Washington Post has admitted it. Even the Biden National Oceanic Atmospheric admitted it. Of the geologic history of the Earth, we're currently in the lowest carbon dioxide levels, the 10% lowest. 90% of Earth's history has had higher CO2. We're also in the 10% coldest period of Earth's history. 90% of Earth's history has been warmer without ice at either pole. Today, we have ice at both poles. So it has been a literal con from beginning to end. Humans can't control the weather and the climate, no matter how much you tax us and regulate us, and no matter how much you get rid of wood-fired pizza ovens and your gas, appliances. And stop eating meat. It makes zero difference. Not only does all of these green policies, all they've done is shut down the once mighty Western nations and outsourced all of our energy to Venezuela, the Middle East, China, India, Brazil. And this is the trend unless we reverse it. And frankly, Donald Trump is reversing it. Argentina is reversing it. Bolsonaro tried to reverse it. A lot of good Eastern European nations like Poland, Hungary are trying to reverse it. There's been some good news out of Europe trying to reverse it, but it's a scam from beginning to end. And the great news, I'll end on this, my first question. Sorry about the timer.
You're good. You're good, Mark.
COVID and climate, I mentioned the merging, but COVID was the eye opener. COVID brought together so many liberals, from Naomi Wolf to Jimmy Dore to RFK Jr. To what's his name? The British guy accused of all this, the British actor who does the podcast now, and they're accusing him of rape to try to silence him.
Russell Brand. Yeah.
Another one. All of these people said in almost identical language is COVID opened their eyes. They always just accepted the consensus on climate change. But once they saw, how COVID was crafted. They started questioning everything. And now, like someone like RFK Jr., when he ran for president, said he's the one that called for jailing climate skeptics. I know, because I'm the one that interviewed him at the New York City Climate March 2014 that went viral. His campaign actually reached out to me for the whole interview because it was hurting him. But he said, I will not mention climate change in this campaign. It has been hijacked for totalitarian control by the United Nations World Economic Forum and the World Health Organization. Boom! That is where we are today with climate. This has been the most massive shift we've seen. The UN climate process falling apart. The UN's got a big summit coming up in Brazil, which I'm going to. This will be my 22nd out of 25, I think it is, UN climate summits all over the world. The most exotic.
Are you welcome there?
No,
you don't get free coffee.
I've had armed UN climate cops throw me out in the desert in Morocco because I had a cardboard cutout of Donald Trump and a paper shredder shredding the UN Paris Agreement. No, they've had a lot. They banned me for life, and then I was able to get back in by promising to behave at future summits. But no, we've had events with NASA astronauts, and after we got started 5-10 minutes in, they'd come in and say, we have to cut you off. We need the room. John Kerry, the climate envoy, is coming in. And they would just turn off the mics and the lights and everything while we're in the middle of an event. So they treated us like garbage for decades. But we go because it's fun and we like to be the problem. And this will be the first time in my lifetime there'll be no U.S. delegation, apparently. So I'm thinking of appointing myself the official U.S. delegation without any authorization from the Trump administration.
I second the vote. I second your irrelevant vote. I'll be irrelevant number 2.
So that's where we are with climate. It's wreaks havoc. The solutions on Africa. I've done reports where it's I think it's 5 African nations now, from Zambia to places like Kenya,
Tanzania.
Mauritania. I think it's Tanzania.
Yeah.
Up to 20%. 25% of their land is now owned by wealthy European nations.
Yep.
Why is that? They locked up land that Africans can no longer access for their own use, for their own resource. Why is that? Because wealthy European nations are buying up land in Africa to buy carbon offsets so that they can fly private jets and go to the World Economic Forum and UN summits and live the first class Western lifestyle, right?
Yeah.
They punish Africans. Africa has been denied massive development, bans on coal plants through trading deals. They can't even have, certain agricultural practices. Everything's from above. It's a new form of colonialism that's descended upon the poorest nations in the world. And you'll find Africans don't give squat about climate change, other than, I should qualify that, many African leaders. Africa is actually the highest attended of the UN climate summits, not the Africans, but their leaders like it, because the UN realized in order to get nations that will be harmed by the policies, they have to pay off the politicians. And that's why they have the highest attendance, African leaders. Not saying they're more corrupt than other nations.
It's all equal. It's all power.
That's how they bring them in, by saying they promise. And what they do is this UN climate fund, it pays countries to be poor. In other words, the countries that get the most funding are the ones that are most willing to lock their citizens in poverty. If you're willing to limit your development, put massive restrictions, they'll give you huge amounts of money, which you can then give to your friends. You can make sure you're reelected. You can build monuments to yourself. At the same time, you can just keep your country poor because that's, saving the planet. It's a completely upside down world. Donald Trump's not going to be enough. His presidency's been phenomenal on these issues, climate and energy and environment, but he's one man. And if you take him out of the picture, I don't trust JD Vance, and I don't trust Ron DeSantis. I don't trust Vivek Ramaswamy. Certainly don't trust Nikki Haley. I don't know. There's really no one on the horizon after Donald Trump that just doesn't give an F. And that's the problem I have right now. I don't know where we go after him.
And you brought up right in the beginning, you brought up this is the oldest trick in the book, guys. This is the oldest trick in the book. When a tribe or a civilization would have a drought and they were running out of food to feed the village, they said they needed to sacrifice people to the gods to create rain. So they pitched climate. The gods are angry at us. The gods are continually angry at us. So we need to cull the herd because we don't have enough food. That's the reality. They needed to kill people so they didn't have less mouths to feed, hoping that it would bring rain to feed the rest of them. This is literally the oldest con job. It goes back thousands and thousands.
We have not advanced. People think, oh, we're so advanced. Really? Did you see how we acted during COVID? We knew 100 years ago that masks didn't work. Washington Post, before COVID even hit, masks were useless in the pandemic. And then it's suddenly like Anthony Fauci says we must, the government says, and every corporation, By the way, I'm watching this is related to the Great Reset and this whole thing. I'm watching old Kojak shows from the 70s. And they're featuring a lot of these episodes, these small mom and pop independent shops with diners and dry cleaners and small businesses and variety stores. And it just got me thinking, like, geez, I couldn't imagine in the 70s them trying to impose mask mandates and vaccine
Right.
mandates and all this on these employees. It wouldn't have worked. It was just too diverse, right? So then I said, I wonder how small business has done since the 70s. Well, lo and behold, I'm looking at all these stats. Small business is thriving more now than we've ever had, much more than the 70s, a growth in small business. I'm like, what the hell? Am I living in a bizarre world? I
Yes.
looked into it. You ready for the numbers behind it? Well, I don't have the exact numbers in my head, but the gist behind it is they count every franchise as a small business. In other words,
Yes.
if you're a franchisee of McDonald's, you're a small business, or Staples or Home Depot. But wait a minute. Are you really a small business on the scale of what we used to have in America? In
Not
other
even
words,
close.
can you control the menu in your restaurant? Can you control the inventory in your restaurant? Can you even decorate your restaurant? Can you control whether your employees are forced to wear masks? Can you control whether your employees have vaccine? No, you're not really a small business. I mean, I guess on technical levels, you could argue you are, but it's not the same. You're not a small independent business owner. You are literally just a
Independent.
little tentacle of a giant corporation that's colluding with the government as needed whenever they want to crush you and make you bend to their will. You can't even put up a curtain without their approval and fitting the corporate edict and all the retail chain stuff. Anyway,
No, you hit the nail on the head, Mark. The nail on
I
the
just wanted to mention that the America we have today is far from the America we need to go back and we need to reform. But I don't even think Trump's presidency can scratch the surface. He's only one man, one presidency, and frankly, he's gotten a little bit off track with Palantir and all the surveillance state stuff.
Yeah. Yeah, I agree. Now, you hit the nail on the head. That's where I was going with that, is that the end result of climate change, regulation,
Yeah.
EPA, constant taxation, carbon taxes in the future has been to create a monopolistic state. So
Yeah.
we live in that already. It's you just
And they
just
call
described
you,
it.
oh, look at all these small businesses. Oh, really? Well, let's see. Let's see what happens in the next pandemic if the Democrats or a mainstream Republican. Do you really own your business? Are you going to be able to open
Right.
when they tell you can't? Are you going to be able to not force your employee? No, they'll just strip your franchise. And what are you going to do then? And usually, like McDonald's, the whole gist of their business empire was they own the land.
That's right.
McDonald's
It's a
land
real
corporation,
estate play.
it wasn't even a restaurant, it was a land. So even if you have that small business, guess what? You're booted the hell out of there the second you don't comply. It's all bullshit. Sorry, it's all statistics.
No, you're good. Bring it. Keep bringing it. The most recent place here, and again, this is just a way of lassoing people in, taxing them more, making it more expensive to
And
grow
who
your own
tell you there are
enterprise.
thriving small businesses in America? I mean,
Yeah,
there
they
are
don't
all small
exist.
businesses, but I'm just saying there are. There's a lot of them. I'm just saying, but the numbers have to be down. I'm talking about the independent small businesses.
Yeah,
So
the independents, like they're so few and far. I'm a 15-time co-founder now, so I totally get that. It's almost
yeah,
impossible to compete with monopolies especially if you're in the retail sector or even oil and gas. We don't have monopolies per se, but we have oligarchs for certain.
we do. And
So
that's sadly the COVID lockdowns. We had a lot of wild, I guess you could call them, I don't know, wildcat, it might not be the technical term, but I was touring a lot of these small fracking sites in Pennsylvania and other states that have in Texas. And what happens is the lockdowns and then the huge drop in demand wiped out all the smaller fracking.
completely.
And then who buys it? The big boys come in and suck it all down. It is late, have reconsidered a lot of my economic views. I'm not a Bernie Sanders guy, but there is something people call it late stage capitalism, but there is something about the idea of corporations just keep expanding and buying out. And there's something in there that's just not working and the need for reform. I think a lot of it is, I don't like the idea of the corporate campaign donations and unlimited funds going back to
Needs to go immediately.
yeah. It's again, people shouldn't be naive about MAGA, or Donald Trump. He cannot do all this. He can have a
Right.
great 4-year run with a lot of consequential things and be a very consequential president. But I just don't know that there's going to be follow up after that.
Yeah, no, it's a big fear I have too. Now, one of the things that you constantly see is the controlled apparatus. So you have political contributions going to politicians who control the media through the government spending. And now the media becomes the weaponization for these oligarchs who want to take over small business. And it's happening. One of the most fascinating, I'm in Bitcoin mining. So one of the most fascinating things for me is, 8 years ago, I was like, why are people doing Bitcoin? It's so bad for the environment. There's a white paper produced by a competitor saying how bad Bitcoin mining was
Yes.
for the climate. And I want you to cover that, not from me, but from you. And there's another few people on Twitter that expose this tremendously. It's been great for the environment. So walk us through the liberal tirades against free money for freedom. They don't want that. They definitely don't want that.
You have Pocahontas, Senator Elizabeth Warren. That's been one of her big issues about Bitcoin mining and climate change. Well, here's the thing. I had some headlines here. China's Bitcoin mining threatens global climate goals as energy consumption overtakes that. So they're trying to blame China. China is just blowing the rest of the world away in terms of coal production, the new coal place. And it's not because of Bitcoin, though. Washington Post, growing. This was funny. This was from 2025. This earlier, 2 months ago. Growing weed takes more energy than mining Bitcoin. So right there, the Washington Post is admitting this is horseshit. Growing weed uses 1% of all American energy. The planet uses 10 million cars. So if growing weed is much worse than Bitcoin, what are we worried about Bitcoin for? Because it's silly.
You can't control Bitcoin. You can control stoners.
Yeah. Bitcoin is eating the earth. Computers creating worthless cryptocurrency drive global warming. I'm just reading you some of the media claims I've read. Bitcoin alone could push global temperatures over 2 degrees Celsius, catastrophic threshold by 2034. These are just some of the stuff I've covered at Climate Depot. Malignant Bitcoin is ruining the planet, slowing efforts to transition away from fossil fuels. Well, it was in, let's see if I have the year on this one, 2018, actually. It was Bjørn Lomborg, author of The Skeptical Environmentalist. He's a statistician in Denmark. Did a huge estimate using International Energy Agency data, and he found out that Bitcoin's current consumption of electricity was not even 1/10 of 1% of global electricity generation. In other words, it wasn't even showing up on the map.
Right.
And I think people need to understand it's not about climate change. And these people aren't just against Bitcoin because they're worried about the environment. They're worried about, because they're the people most hysterical about Bitcoin harming the planet and harming the environment are the ones pushing the central bank digital currency. And that includes everyone. Joe Biden did a whole authorization on that in his last term. That is that's what's happening in Canada with Mark Carney as the president. That's what the World Economic Forum wants. And when you have one central bank digital currency that all the governments agree to, guess what? You don't get them. You don't wear a mask. You don't get a vaccine. You're denied access to your own bank card. The government doesn't like what you wrote on social media. They declare you a domestic terrorist. They take away your ability to buy groceries. Sorry, your card won't work. And you can't say, I'll go to my community bank down the street. Just like the restaurants we were talking about, the change. That's not going to be an option. So they fear Bitcoin so much. I think the reason they brought in all this nonsense about climate and environment, they're trying to get the environmental activists to just be another layer to go after Bitcoin and a mouthpiece. And that's how you get like Senator Elizabeth Warren giving Senate speeches on it. It's just, there's no there.
Yeah, I mean, Bitcoin mining has brought a ton of electricity and running water to Africa because they're building grids.
Yes.
61% of Bitcoin mining energy comes from renewable resources. It actually should be the darling story of true environmentalists. You're creating a digital platform for money that a government can't control, and it's actually helping the environment. That's the most fascinating thing about this PSYOP. So we're almost out of time here, Mark. We have a half an hour, and man, would I love to have you back on for an hour sometime. You and I'd love to take you out for dinner because you and I would have some serious laughs, my friend. Yeah. This has been one of the most entertaining interviews that I've done in a long time. And if it's not entertaining to you, I have a suggestion. If what Mark is saying to you is angering you, you've been gaslit. You have been gaslit. So take a look in the mirror and reflect a little bit on what he's saying, because this has all been a control mechanism to extort money from people, control from independents, and to reduce the rights of civilians for an uncontrollable thing called the climate. It is the most ridiculous thing that we've dealt with in our lifetime. And it has been going on for thousands and thousands of years. It just sounds cooler now, Mark. That's the cool thing. Now it's like on your phone, there's no child sacrifice anymore, but they'll sacrifice your money and not your child anymore to save the environment.
And they will. And they have kids. And I've covered this at Climate Depot, my website. In Australia, Europe, they do PSYOPs on kids where they bring in processed insects like crickets and mealworms, and they put it in like with seasoning. They look like potato chips. They give it to the kids. You can watch this on video. They give it to the kids. The kids are like, this tastes great. It tastes like a potato chip. Like, well, go home and tell your parent that you ate a bug today and you think there's nothing wrong. They try to normalize this because what Bill Gates has said, I mean, let me just end with this concept. The Great Reset was the culmination of all of that. Now, technically, the Great Reset sort of been major pushback, as I mentioned, Europe and the United
For
States and
certain, yeah.
so, but essentially, it was the intentional rationing and collapse of energy, food, transportation, freedom of movement, and of course, our freedom of speech and our financial system. I mean, that was partially what we have all the spending and the money printing and the collapse. You don't need really tax increases anymore. You just print more money, which then creates inflation. You notice you don't have like big, even under Democrat presidents, you don't have, we're going to vote for a tax increase because we need to pay for this. That's like such a quaint idea. Pay for it. We'll just borrow more. What's the big deal? Anyway, so what it is when you go back, look at this, the collapse of energy was to create rationing and make us desperate. The collapse of the food supply came in many forms. One of them was going after methane restrictions, which led to all the meat restrictions we're seeing, particularly in Europe. They're culling hundreds of thousands in Ireland alone of cows because of methane. They were coming, John Kerry said they're coming after U.S. Cattle. Bill Gates, America's #1 largest single farmland owner, followed closely by China, followed closely by Jeff Bezos and other billionaires. And why do they want to buy this land? Well, Bill Gates told MIT Technology Review that his #1 goal was to end basically animal farming in America, that we should all be moving to the laboratory. And he and Richard Branson, another billionaire, invested billions into lab-grown meat. Now, lab-grown meat is not the Impossible Burger or anything like that. It's not vegetable oil processed crap, which is very unhealthy. Even the CNN nutrition,
extremely unhealthy.
It's disgusting. It's like unhealthy oils and fats. And anyway, the lab-grown meat is stem cells from a cow, sheep, or pig mixed with the fetal blood, put into a petri dish, mixed up. It grows into an amorphous blob, similar to Invasion of the Body Snatchers, which is then properly processed with dyes and texture additives and printed on a 3D printer. And by the way, it is for fish because it's derived genetically from them. And this is what they want. They want to get rid of American farmers with cattle and sheep and pigs and just move it all to the laboratory. Very expensive. Who's going to be able to fund those laboratories? Billionaires. And also, there was even studies in the New Scientist, which is a left-wing garbage scientific publication, which says it's 25 times worse for the planet when you do lab-grown meat and you bring it up to scale, which is absurd. So you had that, and then you have the freedom of movement. Yeah, the ban on gas-powered cars. No one voted for. Everyone from Gavin Newsom executive board, unelected bureaucrats, California Air Resources Board, unelected bureaucrats, EPA, unelected bureaucrats throughout Europe. I was in EU last summer and testified before Polish Parliament. Was in what city was I in? Anyway, I went to a major climate conference. Anyway, they never voted for the ban on electric cars, but then it didn't matter because the World Bank told automakers, hinted that if you continue to make gas-powered cars, you're going to be we're going to defund you and not give you the financing. Then you had corporate banks saying, we're going to stop giving out car loans for people who buy gas-powered cars. Then you had cities in Colorado, California, other places banning the creation of new gas stations to create gas station shortages. None of this happened with anyone's vote. Just like we didn't vote for mask mandates or vaccine mandates. We didn't vote for the paper straws. We didn't vote for gas-powered car bans. We didn't vote for meat restrictions, but it all happens. And then you had CNN and saying we need carbon passports for travel, government monitoring, restricting it. Would determine whether you can still travel. And you had Europe now and Spain, France, and banning short haul flights. No, for global warming, not affecting private jets, but commercial. If it's like a 2.5 hour or less, you can't take it. You have to go in a car, which is a much higher death rate, by the way, than flying.
Way higher.
Anyway, that's the mess we were in. Donald Trump literally has stopped the world cold at the moment with that. Then my advice to Trump would be, stay away from the billionaire class, and just be careful of that. Be careful of the surveillance state. Of course, be careful of foreign entanglements as well. But he's doing a great job, sort of deregulatory wise, and his agenda and keeping his promises. But he has the potential; he could be derailed. I'm not exactly thrilled. I don't like the big mega bill they're passing now. There's a lot of good stuff in it. There's a lot of bad stuff.
It's business as usual. Yeah, it's business as usual. It's nothing special.
Thomas Massey's, and I know a lot of MAGAs told to hate Thomas Massey, but he's my favorite congressman by far in decades, since Ron Paul was a congressman, and before that, Phil Crane of Illinois. Look him up, Phil Crane. He was great in the 1980s.
We only need one idol. He was here. He died for our sins. Other than that, it's people who vote for things, right? So I think we idolize politicians too much. This is great. One thing we didn't bring up is that climate change people have not, who are in bed with Palantir and some of these other big conglomerates around the world, but a couple before that even, you don't actually need to pass a bill when you have an oligarchical
Yes.
network around the world. You don't need to pass a bill. They can just stop doing business with you and end any resistance.
That's the Trump effect too, though. Trump's had a big impact there. But you know
Big
who else
impact
had
there.
a big impact, and this is huge, and they deserve major kudos. Red state attorney generals from
Yes.
from Florida to West Virginia,
Missouri.
unbelievable. They've stopped in its tracks things like ESG, also even transgenderism, but also all of the carbon finance banks and the UN, all this stuff that was set up by the central bankers to basically say, you can't do business unless you play along or you go along with this agenda or you support net zero, completely being dismantled. And in fact,
Yes.
every major bank has dropped out of these carbon finance and the ESG movement is dying. Now they're going to rebrand. These are still, I would like to see a Teddy Roosevelt style impact here. I'd like to see the breakup of big tech, Google, Facebook. I think they're
100%.
monopolies. I'd like to see some kind of corporate reform and break up a monopoly. Now, but I don't think that's going to happen in Trump. I just think
I hope it does. We don't know. We don't know what tomorrow will bring.
significant level, but I mean, I think that's what I think America needs, because we've reached a point where it's just growing more and more. Just it's too small. It's too tough for the smaller guy and smaller businesses to survive at this point.
Well, and the one area that no climate agenda person has talked about or attacked yet is AI, which uses anywhere between
Yeah,
13 and 64 times the amount of energy as traditional internet. I
AI
haven't heard one of them say anything about AI yet.
every interaction I've had with AI, admittedly limited, from Chat GPT to just like the AI assistants, it's all just, it reminds me of the corporate speak, like we're all in this together. It's just that same mentality. It's all bullshit. So I have yet to see anything with AI. I know there's a lot of potential. I don't
There's
like
definitely
Trump
potential.
is doing all that infrastructure. I don't like that. I think they got rid of that in the final bill. Did they get rid of that thing where states couldn't regulate the data centers?
It
And
was removed, and then I haven't checked this
I
morning, but I know it was removed. It could have been put back in. I don't
Yeah,
know,
there's
but
lots of. I think they're actually voting live as we're taping this right now. The
yeah,
House on this, but anyway, the only bright spot about AI, and it's funny bright spot, is you had people like Larry Fink, the CEO of BlackRock, admit, well, with all our power demands with AI, and they're saying it's going to require massive power, right? Which is
huge amounts of power.
probably overblown, probably on the order of 80%, because it's kind of like you look at something like the horse
No,
manure.
it's not overblown. I'm in off-grid energy. You need a ton of energy to run AI, a
Well,
ton
I
of it.
don't, again, you might, I mean, yeah, well, I'm just giving you historical, like 1890, they said, horse manure was going to be 3 stories high by 1930 in every major city. Well, the invention of the, I'm thinking technology. Yeah, that Chinese firm, which I don't know if that was just a propaganda effort, but they claimed they did it without all of the
Right.
energy.
It was a hoax.
I think they're still overblown. But anyway, my point is the estimates are staggering of a power supply for AI. Larry Fink was forced to admit solar and wind could never power AI.
That's
Now
right.
we have Meta, Facebook, Bill Gates renting, leasing, buying nuclear plants to actually run AI. You have the resurrection of coal. You have all these people supporting gas who would otherwise never support it. So that's been funny to see them just finally admit that oil, wind, and solar are total bullshit at this point. I'm
Yeah.
never opposed to a future
Yeah, we
technological.
need more energy, no matter how you look at it.
I'm
Just
not
don't claim
opposed
it can
to solar and wind.
replace
I'm just
existing.
opposed to mandating something that's not ready and taking
That's
away
right.
stuff that is, and also useless subsidies like that they have. And I'm not for fossil fuel subsidies either, but that's overblown. But to the extent that we do fossil fuel subsidies, cut them out, which
Yeah.
probably won't happen because they pay congressmen a lot of money.
A lot of money. Well, Mark, this has been one of my favorite interviews in a long time, man. I got to get you back on here in a couple months, so we'll
Sure.
catch up. This has been so much fun. If you're ever in Dallas, man, let's go grab a steak that was grown by a cow that farts, and
I'm
we'll
going to be in
enjoy it
Dallas
together.
next February, actually, for a land rights conference, I think. So I'll let you know. Yeah.
Let's do it. Let's do it. So, Mark, how can everybody find you online?
You go to Twitter at Climate Depot, DOPOT, and climatedepot.com. And my most recent book is Great Reset, Global Elites in the Permanent Lockdown, which even Alex Jones said he enjoyed and was better than his book because it was more comprehensive. But anyway, and also my movie is Climate Hustle 2, which stars Kevin Sorbo, the actor. He's in it, and that was 2020.
Nice.
And that deals with COVID climate it's right during COVID that we released that. So.
Well, give it a look, give it a read, check out his website, follow him on Twitter. You got a great Twitter account, by the way, or X, whatever we're calling it this week. Well, God bless you, Mark. God bless this country, and we will see you all next time. Thank you so much for being here, brother.
All right. Thanks a lot, Eric. Appreciate it.